Hello, Spark fans. Welcome back to Advancing Spark, where today we're having a look at the brand new Databricks Assistant. Now, this is not to be confused with Lakehouse IQ that was announced at the Data AI Summit. This is the precursor. This is getting things in place before Lakehouse IQ comes along. And we'll talk about what that means in a little bit. So, yeah, we're just going to have a look at the various different ways you can use the new Databricks Assistant to help write your code, to fix errors, to suggest new ways of doing things, to transpose one language to another language, loads and loads of use cases. You can ask it who I am, which is always funny. Yeah, basically it's ChatGPT, but baked into Databricks, and we'll have a look at what that means in a second. Now, before we get onto that, I do want to talk about a new thing that is coming. So, in probably about a month's time or so, we're going to start a new series of live streams. We're going to have an Ask Databricks stream where we're going to have different product managers from the Databricks team themselves coming to talk about various different products. And that's going to be Delta Live tables and streaming and workflows and various things. So if you've got questions you want to ask the Databricks team directly, then we're going to be doing those live streams very, very soon. Watch this space. We'll be doing announcements and various things on it. And yeah, we'll share some news soon. As always, if you are new around here, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's go and have a look at what's going on. So, we've got this thing, the Databricks Assistant, not Lakehouse IQ, the Databricks Assistant. We're going to see, again, it was announced, it was coming back at the Data AI Summit. You can do various things. So I'll share the link to this blog down in the comments, and you can see a few different things you can do. Again, show me various things, to write SQL queries for you, or to complete your code. We'll have a look at that. Change your language of your code, explain your code, fix bugs. That's actually very, very good. And we'll have a dig now. Main thing is, big difference in that if we dig into the FAQ and we have a look at, so what is the Databricks Assistant? And we can skip, I'll show you how to enable it in a second. But we can see this is using Azure OpenAI or the OpenAI service, depending on whether you're in Azure or AWS. This is not using... So when they talked about Lakehouse IQ, they talked about a custom large language model trained on each and every different customer's data. This is not that. Essentially, the Databricks Assistant is going off calling generic ChatGPT, probably with a few kind of bit of prompt handling to get it out there, and returning it from there. So this knows what ChatGPT knows, as well as a little bit of context from your query and your data model. That is it. It has not been fully trained on your entire user context. That's what Lakehouse IQ is going to do. So that's why they were very careful when they were announcing it to say there's a difference between Lakehouse, like the Databricks Assistant, essentially the ability to have a chat style interface baked in, and Lakehouse IQ, which is the custom tailored premium LLM version that sits underneath that if you turn it on. And that is not around yet. We can't have a look at that yet. So we're using this, basically ChatGPT baked directly into the Databricks workspace itself. So let's go and turn it on. So I have to go into the account console. So you need to have set up Unity Catalog. You need to have UC enabled to use all this stuff. Again, yet another thing why you should be using Unity Catalog. You get a load of extra stuff if you do it. I'm going to go over to my settings, and I've got feature enablement. Now, in order to do that, I've got this enable third-party services for AI assistive features. When they said that, I was like, why is it third party? Because Lakehouse IQ, it's a thing they're building. Makes sense now. We're essentially saying allow Azure OpenAI to talk to your Databricks workspace. Now, I've not seen what that looks like when you get into the dark and hairy private linked network side of Databricks, but I'm assuming that is all fine. I've not looked into it, but we'll see. So that is now turned on, and I've enabled that for all workspaces in this account. So it's kind of like an all or nothing. So be aware, turning it on makes it currently available. Now, the other thing they mention in here is this is free. Great. For now. So there will be final pricing, and that'll be communicated when it goes GA. Now, Azure OpenAI services, it's a web service like cognitive services. It's pay per click. So you're going to pay per click every time you talk to the assistant eventually, we assume, or there'll be a threshold or a usage barrier. I don't know. But be aware, it will eventually come with a cost, but currently it's free. So, warnings aside, let's go and have a bit of a look at it. I'm just going to dive in somewhere into my Unity testing, going to build a little just, whoops, no, notebook. There we go. Okay, so I've got a Python notebook. Main thing to notice, I've got this new little button on the side. I've now got this little assistant I can turn on, and it actually comes and says, hey, I'm an assistant. So I can come in here and say, right, let's see. So yeah, write me a data frame that reads from a CSV. Now, that's really generic. I could have said it in PySpark or in R or in something else. It's assumed I'm in Python. I'm assuming because of the context of my notebook, and it's gone and written there. It's just made an assumption. It's explained its reasoning, explained working, kind of exactly the same as ChatGPT does. So I can copy that code, or I can just go, yeah, paste it in, put it into myself. Now, there's a few things here. I mean, I don't need to do any of that because I'm in Databricks and it's automatically created a session for me in my notebook. So it's very much using vanilla ChatGPT. This is what ChatGPT would tell me if I was doing it without the necessary context of, it's not how I do it normally, but that is valid PySpark code. It has written me a cell that will read a CSV. So me, as the developer, I've got my junior developer next to me, my co-pilot. That's why Microsoft call it co-pilot. So I've got my Databricks Assistant going, just start writing it. It gives me the code. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, no, that's not quite right. We don't need any of that. I'd probably use display rather than show because we're not using vanilla Spark. Would be fine. I'll do it that way around. It's not my favorite way of doing things or having those in. I'd normally pass those in as options, but it's okay. Otherwise, that's fine. That's good code. That works. That's kind of the way we're working with it. It's refining code. It's building and building and building and giving you better things. Now, yeah, if it's not coding quite in your style, that's okay. I was having a play yesterday. I was trying to do some different things. So write me some PySpark to bring in some data from an existing table, sure. And it wrote me some PySpark. And yes, I didn't need all of that. I could just go straight for that, but that's entirely valid Spark. That's great. I could go and pull it in. I added the metadata column to the data frame. Again, it's got the context of the chat because it's using the chat style thing, so it knows the previous responses. So I can say, well, just add a metadata column, goes and builds it, and it's built, added in my underscore metadata. So it knows that that's the system column, and it knows that that's going to give me all my extra stuff. It's also decided to give me an example of pulling out a couple of attributes from that. I don't need that. It's overachieving. It's fine. Now, this is when it started to get a little bit interesting. So it says, write a template autoloader cell using the rescue column. Like, okay, and it goes off, brings back some fairly decent looking code, honestly. But let's have a dive into that, right? So it's pulling in from Unix time. Don't know why. It's cool. It's made up a schema. So it's giving me a sample schema. I need to change that. It's set up all of my cloud file options. It's doing a data frame equals read stream. It's formatted it the way I prefer it to. It's passed it in using a bunch of quads, which is great. It's filtering a column. It's converting the corrupt record column to Unix time. And then it's writing it out somewhere. Okay, there's some interesting stuff in there. But the more I looked at this, the more I went, wait. So, for example, this. Cloud files, rescue unsupported keys. That's not a thing. That's not the option you use. You use cloud files schema evolution type, and then you choose rescue as the value. So that's hallucinated the fact that that's the cloud file option I need. And I was gaslighting me. I was sitting there going, is that a new option? Is that something I don't know? And I dug into it. I don't think it is. And it's like, oh, okay. So that's just wrong. Fine. Okay. Well, that's okay. We can deal with a couple of mistakes in here because that's what it is. It's an assistant doing some of the work, and I'm having to check it. It's using a rescue column. Well, the rescue column is automatically defaulted to underscore rescue, but it's close. But you have to know that. Why it's doing the timestamp from the corrupt record? That wouldn't make sense. You can get it from the underscore import file name, or you can go from the metadata column, but it doesn't make sense going from corrupt record. That's just garbage. And then display data frame equals df.select, cool. But then output data frame hasn't been defined anywhere. That's just made that up. So, but yeah, there's some issues with the code it makes because it's essentially making a load of assumptions and it's hallucinating a little bit. So you need to know it. You still need to have the human in the loop, right? You still need to have someone checking this and going, that's right, cool, yeah, that's saved me a load of work. Great, pattern makes sense. But you still need to know what you're doing to fix it if you're trying to do something that... If I didn't understand autoloader, if I'd never used autoloader and I tried to do this, I would have a world of pain trying to fix this and figure out why it was broken, why it wasn't working. But even so, it's interesting, it works. You can use it and go and play with this stuff and actually get a lot out of it. Let's go back to another thing. Again, this is just ChatGPT, so I can go, who is Simon Whiteley? There we go. And that's essentially saying, does the internet know who I am? Oh, well-known data engineer, instructor at data camp. That's a liar. Never instructed at data camp. Specialize in Spark, Azure, Databricks. Yeah. Not an author of a book on Spark. It's very generous to me, but that's a lie. Just weird lies. Really, really interesting that it is just ChatGPT. So I was kind of expecting when I first came in here that you'd be asking questions and you'd be like, that's outside my remit as a coding assistant, but you can use it just as another way of getting to your ChatGPT style interface. So interesting stuff that it's actually doing. The other super interesting thing is if we go and have a look, if I bring the assistant in, I'm just going to clear this down and we can start again. So I've got this is one of our training notebooks, and we go through fail fast, permissive, fail fast, drop malformed parsing, and this deliberately fails. So here we are forcing it to fail because we're trying to read something with fail fast enabled, and we know it's going to be bad. And actually the error message is pretty good here. But the new thing we can do if we've got assistant enabled is this diagnose error. If I looked at that going, I don't know what that is, it automatically runs a how do I fix my code thing. It then passes that out to the assistant, which has looked at it and said, okay, well, what you're trying to do is it's drop malformed. If you don't want this to error, well, you need to switch over to permissive. It's explained why that is. It's like either fix your data so it actually works, mate. Yeah, I get it. Or switch it over to permissive and it's not going to break anymore. Now, for me, that's makes me sad. I don't like backslash as the line continuator. So write that again with brackets for line continuation. I should be able to get it to actually try again, but actually make it work properly. And it just ignore me. Great, thanks. Yeah, I don't know why. It's actually been pretty good at doing that previously. Okay. Let's use brackets instead of backslash. Oops. For line continuation. Let's see. Try again. And there we go. Like to be a little bit more explicit, and then it actually understood what I was asking it to do. Get rid of the old school way of doing things, actually write it as nice. Does it still make sense? Yeah. And that all makes sense. I can then actually use and run that code. Now it's interesting, because actually the code that was running from, it's actually a little bit different, because it doesn't have that load from that mount point in there. It's had to read way further up to actually work out what that was talking about. And it's rewritten it actually with the full context in that cell rather than still referring to the variable I used. So it's interesting in that it's got the full context of the notebook it's running in and where that cell was in context. Maybe I still wanted it to refer to my variable rather than hard-code it as a path, but it's informed me what the thing that was breaking was and how I would fix it. I wouldn't necessarily blindly just paste that in and assume it's going to work. I now know why it broke, how it broke, what's happening. You can also say, let's go explain this code. And actually sort of say, well, what's going on in here? Okay. It's using fail fast, it's reading a CSV, what fail fast is, some other options, how it works. So you can put your cursor in a cell and say, what's going on here? And it will explain what that code's doing. Again, super useful. Now, the final piece I've had less success with, honestly, which is the code completion, the true like some Copilot style way of working things. This is when we finish off in like some examples of work and we pull it all together. Now, they call it LakeSense, which makes me laugh, because in Microsoft world, they call it IntelliSense for code completion everywhere. But yeah, essentially you can start writing some code, and then do Control-Shift-Space if you're on Windows, and it should start writing some code for you. So give it a go. See if this actually works. To write code to read a CSV into a data frame. That's what I'm looking for. So Control-Shift-Space here should start completing my code. Now, I've generally found that I had to actually start something. I've found I've had to start typing for it to go, okay, yeah, I know, you want me to help you now. Okay, let's do df equals Control-Shift-Space again, and I should see it start to complete. There we go. And again, interesting, because it's assumed I'm using pandas. We've not initialized pandas. I don't want it to be using pandas. I want it to be using spark.read.csv. So it's got it wrong. It's making some assumptions still about how we want to do things. But maybe that's my prompt. Maybe my prompt isn't detailed enough. So I want PySpark code to read a CSV into a data frame. Okay, let's try that again. Kind of assuming it's still going to assume I want to use pandas. It's a big fan of pandas. There's a lot of pandas out on the internet that's been trained with. So it's useful, and I found it's actually fairly good at doing things. I've not found it the fastest in terms of actually when it generates the code and how it actually spins up to work out what I want to do. I think part of it might just be because I'm starting with a blank slate, and I'm like, yeah, go on, figure out the context. Whereas actually, if you had a few cells worth of code, and you're like, right, now do this with the code, it's got a lot more context to actually work with. It's going to be able to more understand it rather than going, here's a blank slate. Can you please write some code for me? Which doesn't really want to. So yeah, I found that to be probably the flakiest bit so far. But the other part, just using it as a pure assistant, using it to diagnose errors is great. Using it to rewrite code works pretty well. Using it to generate code as a blank template, be very careful about hallucinations, especially with the more complex esoteric parts, such as autoloader, doing weird and wonderful things. Like the final thing I was having a play with is on the SQL side of things. Now, I will cut it some slack on the SQL side of things because I've got I have a little bit of data in this workspace, but I don't have a huge amount of data. I've got a few toy tables and databases I was playing with. So if I came in here, if we go, actually, let's just make a new one. Let's go and add a notebook. I'm going to make this my SQL notebook. And I say, write a query to bring back the total. I'm going to do the sum of line item from fact sale. Now that doesn't have a lot of context. There we go. Kind of makes sense. It's assumed based on what I'm querying. But if I go to my data and actually do a little bit more depth into it. So I wanted to go, it needs the context of it's the adventureworks.dw. Was line item even the right thing? No, it's line total. So it's just gone and generated a query based on the context that it has rather than looking at my table here. So let's be a little bit nicer to it. So I want line total from fact sales. So write a SQL query. Return the sum of line total from adventureworks.dw of fact sales. So it's got the full Unity catalog context of the table I'm looking for there. And yeah, that'll happily work. Oh, no, it won't. It's assumed DBO. Now, part of that is my fault because AdventureWorks is a very, very well-known SQL training database. I've named my my data that's the same as it, and so it's assumed I'm talking about the well-known, famous version of AdventureWorks, not the table that I have got locally, which I've changed and I've done some stuff with. So that's assumed I'm using a different one. So let's go and write that again, and say write SQL query to return that, and aggregate by product name. Now that needs context, right? There's another table called product. It needs to know how to join to it. Now, in this case, I'm assuming it's going to make things up. So I've done it before, and it said, okay, there's a common product key. You join them based on the product key. And again, that's coming from the AdventureWorks out on the internet, not from my local table. But I think you're unlikely to hit that unless you name your tables exactly the same things as very famous common coding examples and patterns that are found out on the internet. So probably my own fault. But just be a little bit careful when you're trying this out and you're having a play with things. Now, big difference. This is using Databricks Assistant. This is not trained specifically. It has the context of my data model, but that's it. Whereas Lakehouse IQ, fine-tuned against your data model, completely understands the context and descriptors and everything inside your data model, much more likely to have the context of what you're talking about going, oh, they're probably referring to that table, not the thing that's on the internet, which would probably, I think, make more sense. So you can see it's struggling here because it's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And it's gone and found AdventureWorks and assumes I'm trying to run a generic AdventureWorks thing rather than the one that's actually on mine. Again, my fault, but be a little careful when you're having a play with it. So it's a really interesting tool. It's doing a lot of interesting stuff, but just take it with a little pinch of salt. So that is now rolling out. It's in all my workspaces now. You need to enable it at the account level, and then suddenly all your users will see it. Remember, it is free for now, but there's going to be pricing when it's out of preview. So if you're looking at error checking, you're looking at code explainability, you're looking at transposing between one language to another, loads and loads of really good use cases. If you're asking it to write something from scratch and it doesn't have context, be very careful and review the code. The same as if you gave the code to a brand new junior intern who'd read all the books about Python and PySpark and they wrote some code. Would you just let them blindly put it into production? No, you check it and go, hey, that's not a thing. Oh yeah, that's right, but that's not in our house coding style. This is why you should write it. You'd give them guidance and you'd check their work, and that's what you need to do if you're using Databricks Assistant currently, because it is new and because it is based on the OpenAI services. It is not that heavily trained on your data yet until we get Lakehouse IQ coming out, and then you can enable it and it'll do a lot more there. So yeah, super interesting stuff. Really powerful. Code explainability is just off the charts with it. It's very cool. And I found it to be surprisingly good at going, yeah, you see all that Java that you got as an error message. This is what the problem actually is, and this is how you fix it. Really good at that stuff. If you're having a play, you're trying to get prompts to be more accurate, use some prompt engineering. Give it some hints, give it some examples, give it some context. You can put loads of detail into your prompt if you're trying to get it right first time. Look at the past videos we've done about prompt engineering and how you think about structuring things and the different ways you can give context. There are better ways to write prompts to give it the best chance of giving you the data that it needs. But even if you do that, still check its work, right? Cool. So that is all I want to go through today. So that is now out. You need to enable it. Go and have a play, see how it goes. Let me know how you get on. Let me know in the comments. Did it actually fix an error that you hadn't been able to fix before? Did it explain some code that someone had written for you and you're like, I have no idea what the hell that is? Yeah, super interested to see how people get on with it. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.